Ghosts and Germs, and welcome to the NJ Today YouTube channel. My name is McConnaughay, and today I will be sharing my thoughts on the new horror film, It. An adaptation of the popular Stephen King novel, this film has blazed a trail for itself that I don't think very many expected. This can be seen through not only the box office returns, but also the reception that it has received from moviegoers and critics alike. The film hit theaters on September 5th, 2017, after a 2-week period of a particularly stagnant domestic box office. In the 2 weeks prior to its release, the only film with a new nationwide release was a modestly successful Leap animated film. This allowed films like Annabelle Creation and The Hitman's Bodyguard to flourish to a degree they likely would not have otherwise, but for the most part, it also just represented a very ho-hum slump for box office receipts. This fact made box office speculations for the Stephen King adaptation very difficult to properly gauge. The weekend after Labor Day is known for particularly weak box office returns, but at the same time, It Chapter 1 was receiving a lot of buzz, especially for a horror film. The initial projections from box office websites like boxoffice.com suggested the film would overperform expectations with a 70 million weekend, whereas The Numbers was even more conservative than that. The final result, however, blew everything out of the water, and It Chapter 1 managed to make 123 million, more than The Conjuring, The Conjuring 2, and Annabelle combined for the record, on its opening weekend, surpassing the former opening weekend record for a horror film by over 100%, and also doubling the September opening weekend record. In one weekend, It Chapter 1 cemented its legacy, and its current prospects suggest that it has a very good chance at topping $500 million and then some at the worldwide box office, making it a breakout film for the horror genre. The film also received positive reviews, being regarded as one of the best Stephen King adaptations to date. I was very excited for this film, and I was very excited when the reviews and box office receipts were what they were. A lot of individuals don't understand the compulsion I have when it comes to box office statistics and details. They don't understand why I go in depth with this information the way I do. I do it not simply out of habit, but also because it shows a perspective on what is working in the movie industry and what isn't. I did a review of Annabelle Creation, and in it, I criticized the shoestring micro-budgets and the way that the industry doesn't take many chances with horror films. Even though they have proven themselves significantly profitable, we always see things taken with a more formulaic approach. Get Out, Split, and Annabelle Creation both were hugely profitable films, all shot for a budget of less than $20 million, the former being very good, whereas I found the other two only enjoyable. Get Out worked, but a film like that is rare, and the reason I like its box office returns is because I want studios to consider that if they go all out for something unique, they can break through that glass ceiling. The thought of it making maybe $600 million from a $35 million production budget will hopefully go a long way in convincing them that maybe you should take some more chances and have more ambitious efforts in the future. Without further ado, It, otherwise known as It Chapter 1, is a supernatural horror film directed by Andy Muschietti, known also for his generally well-received but downright box office hit horror film Mama. As already known, the film is an adaptation of the 1986 novel of the same name by Stephen King, and is also the second time said property has been adapted, having previously been adapted as a TV miniseries. Chase Palmer, Cary Fukunaga, and Gary Dauberman are credited for writing the screenplay. Dauberman also participated in writing the new Annabelle Creation film, which is another film from Warner Brothers. The film is set in Derry, Maine, and follows several children through their experience in school and tackling life in general. The school experience is a considerable part of the film, making certain to touch on things like bullying and the various different stigmas that come with it. Of course, at the center of all of this, however, is the 7 members of the Losers Club, a group of misfit friends that are all terrorized by an odd entity that more often than not takes the form of a clown. The film is intended as being the first of the 2 films in a duology, with the second film focusing on them as adults. I watched the film in a packed theater on a Wednesday, no less, with my girlfriend and a few friends, and I remember on the car ride to the movie, I talked with one of them in regards of what they looked forward to most about the film. Both of us had paralleled views in regard to the It miniseries from the 90s, a series that I've always held fondly in that the miniseries was an enjoyably average execution of its far superior source material, often having inconsistent or cheesy execution and really not able to stand on its own when the nostalgia wanes. Regardless of the downfalls of that film series, both of us concurred that the dynamic and camaraderie of the children was the best aspect. And having read the novel, I believe it's the best part of the material in general. I believe that's a lot of the reason many looked forward to this film too, because I think that's one of the things that Stephen King always delivers on, and the love letter that Stranger Things was to those themes, I went into this film hoping that even if it didn't deliver in other fields, it delivered on that youthful exuberance and that friendship. Having seen the film, and having weighed my thoughts with my friends, the general consensus between us is that It Chapter 1 was a good film. Some of the worries I had were calmed in the early going. The film received positive critical reception, but so have a lot of horror films that I haven't enjoyed. I was worried about Bill Skarsgård and how his performance would be with the role. I had seen the first clip of him already with Georgie and the paper boat, and I had a mixed bag of emotions, but seeing it in context with the film and the way they paid off that scene surprised the hell out of me, and it left me very excited. The cast in this film delivered, for the most part. I do think they delivered believable performances and did have that, that Stand By Me type charm that King's known for and best known for. And I think they offered a realistic portrayal of children. The Richie character is the one that I'm kinda on the fence about. The character is realistic, a trash mouth kid that spouts off a lot of obscenities and makes a lot of perverted comments that aren't nearly as clever as what he seems to think. I like that as a character because if you've ever been around someone in that age group, this isn't uncommon at all. I like his character for this reason, but I also left the film believing they might have went a couple notches overboard, and I would have liked the character to portray the severity of the situation a little better, at least in pivotal moments. In particular, I remember in one moment, towards the end, he drops a comic relief line, and I felt like it took me out of it on some level. The development of most characters was really good, but I would single out Mike Hanlon's character as being particularly one-dimensional. I thought Bill Skarsgård did fantastic in his role as Pennywise the Dancing Clown, and the portrayal of his character actually represents one of my favorite aspects found in horror, or more specifically, the slasher genre of film. The comparison between Freddy Krueger and Pennywise is often thrown around, and with good reason, because the characters are a lot alike. Both can distort reality, both draw strength directly from fear, and both are portrayed in a very charismatic, enthusiastic way. Although I enjoy other approaches as well, something about this approach has always specially appealed to me. A lot can be said about a film that's intricately embroidered, laced with the utmost of meticulous dialogue and tension. But I also like a film that lets it all hang out, and I think that both are equally artistic and important to the horror genre. This film has tons of over-the-top scares. It's like a highlight reel of moments. Some have singled out the jump scares and the supposed lack in suspense, and for that, I'll concur to some extent by saying that at some moments, the scares did come off as formulaic, oftentimes with a repeating approach, but I'll also argue that they were visually inspired, and the rest of the film itself has enough substance to make those moments mean something to me. I frankly enjoyed the ride a lot. Skarsgård delivered a performance that has me very excited. Not only for me, but for the kids of this generation. When I was a little kid, I would watch the Nightmare on Elm Street series constantly. I absolutely adored them, and I always loved Robert Englund's performance as Freddy Krueger. After watching Skarsgård, I do believe we have found a horror icon of the same vein. I can't say enough about how much I liked him in this role, and I think that the amount of fun he seemed to be having showed up on the screen in leaps and bounds. I remember a few news outlets referring to his performance as, being on the same level as Heath Ledger as the Joker as far as depth's concerned, and while I think that's a ridiculous assertion drawn only because of the fact they're both playing dark clowns, I think he delivers everything this character needed to be and more. I mentioned substance in this film, and when I refer to that, I am more than anything referring to the dynamic of Bill and Georgie, with a scene in particular standing out with some real emotional depth behind it. The only real criticisms I have with this film, except for it occasionally not consistently carrying a sense of seriousness, as I mentioned with Richie's character, or Mike's lack of character development. And to be clear, when I say that, I'm not talking about the humor of the film in general, done with Pennywise, which I thought was just awesome and hilarious, but the consistency in the children's approach to him. The other criticism is that my interest started to diminish in the last 20 minutes or so. The film had a longer length than usual for a horror film, and for the most part, I think it allocated its time well. But I also think that they went back into the well for diminishing returns by the end. The scene with Beverly's father towards the end, for instance, they had a lot about that dynamic I thought was really good and thought they did a really good job with it, but that scene felt too long to me, like letting the air out of Pennywise's red balloon. Overall, though, I thought It Chapter 1 was a really good horror film, and it was about everything I wanted from it. I think the film is a real event film for the horror genre that we'll be talking about and feeling the aftershocks for many years to come. I thought Skarsgård absolutely killed it in his performance as Pennywise, and I thought the rest of the cast did pretty well as well. This is the best horror film I've seen this year so far, even beating out Get Out. Although I'll mention that those are two very different types of horror films, the new It really just scratched an itch and meshed with a lot of what I like from the horror film genre. Thanks for watching my review. If you agreed or disagreed with my opinion, feel free to share it in a comment below. I sincerely want to know what everyone thinks about this one. And if you enjoyed this video, feel free to subscribe, as I review video games and movies quite often. I'm also a writer, and my third novel, a horror called Catherine Forever with Love, will be arriving on paperback and Kindle in time for Halloween if you're interested in that. Otherwise, though, that's really about all I have to say for this film. But before I go, I have an ongoing series I like to top off my reviews with called The Great List. Previous reviews have seen films like Sinister and Donnie Darko inducted, as well as the video game Batman Arkham City. For this review, however, I'm happy to induct the South Korean crime film I Saw the Devil into the list.